Thank you, Chairman Gowdy. And Governor Christie, thank you for being here today to discuss the growing crisis of substance abuse in our country. The opioid epidemic is a particular challenge for my state of Kentucky, where overdose deaths rose by 12.5% last year alone. I appreciate your work as chairman of the President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and look forward to working together to make progress on this issue for all the American people. My first question is, I would like to discuss the issue of fentanyl, which accounted for nearly half of the overdose deaths in Kentucky last year. Can you briefly discuss the Commission's findings and recommendations related to this especially lethal drug?
Yes, fentanyl and carfentanil is what will take this crisis to its next geometric explosion, because the strength of fentanyl and carfentanil is so beyond normal street heroin that the first usage of it can lead to death, and often does. It's so lethal that law enforcement officers who come to crime scenes where this is have to be careful in terms of the way they deal with the crime scene so they don't contaminate themselves and wind up overdosing. And in the report, we make it very clear that this is a Chinese problem. And we have urged the President and the Secretary of State to make this a priority with the Chinese and the negotiations that they're undergoing right now. China is where most of the fentanyl and carfentanil is coming from. Sometimes, more times than not, we found, and this is why we recommend an increase in border security, not just at the Mexican border, but with the United States Postal Service. The United States Postal Service is delinquent in stopping these drugs. These drugs are being mailed in to the United States, and as are with the other carriers like FedEx and UPS and others. We are not having the level of enforcement we need, and to your point before, Congressman, this is one of those areas where I think we need to be able to step up our efforts at the Postal Service and at DOJ through the DEA to make sure that we're stopping this stuff from coming into the country. But we also need to make very clear to the Chinese that this is an act of war. You are sending this into our country to kill our people. There's no other purpose for this drug. This drug will kill people. And any foreign country, in my view, who is willfully allowing this to be done is committing an act of extraordinary aggression on our country, and it needs to be met with the right type of diplomatic response by the administration and the Secretary of State, and we've urged that in the report.
And I appreciate the work that you've done along with the administration on seeing a recent crackdown in the Chinese manufacturers, and look forward to working with the committee to see what more we can do through the internet and postal systems to try to prevent that. My last question, through legislation like the 21st Century Cures Act, Congress has worked to provide more support and flexibility to states who are on the front lines of this battle. From your experience as governor, as well as your work on the commission, what advice do you have for Congress on how best to support state and local efforts to combat the opioid epidemic, both now and over the long term? And I know you mentioned the $1 billion didn't go very far. You divided up among the 50 states. But as you know, we're in a financial crisis as well in this country. So what advice do you have for Congress?
Well, first off, I think if this battle is going to be won, it's going to be won with the federal government, the state government acting as partners, but with the state governments taking the lead. We're the ones who are on the ground. And as you said, the problem in Kentucky is different than the problem in New Jersey. And the problem here in Maryland is different than the problem in Missouri. I mean, these are state circumstances depending upon all the different ways that you go about enforcement in your state, the ways you go about treatment in your state and its availability. So our view is that this should be accountability block grants, that block grants should be sent to the states for dealing with this crisis, and that Congress should be demanding accountability in return for the block grant. If I'm given a block grant as a governor and I say in New Jersey the best way for me to spend this money is X, and it will show a decrease in deaths, if I show that decrease in deaths, I should continue to get my funding. And if I don't, my funding should be reduced. To force me as a governor to be accountable for what I'm doing. With all due respect to Congress, it's a very difficult job to be able to determine individual programs that are necessary and effective in all 50 states. And so I really believe we have to trust the governors. And because I don't believe this is a partisan issue, I don't think there's a Republican or a Democratic way to combat this. So I think part of this is going to have to be a leap of faith between Congress and the governors to be able to sit down. And I really do believe that if Congress is serious about doing this, and the president, they need to sit down with the governors. They all come to Washington in February. I won't be there, but the rest of them will be. And the fact is that we need to sit down and say, listen to the governors as to what they need, and Congress then needs to make demands on the governors and say, okay, if we're going to be your partners in this and we're going to help you fund this, then what accountability measures are you willing to give us so that we can be accountable in the financial situation we're in, that this money is being spent in a way that's effective to save lives? And that should, in my view, should be the determining factor. If that number, that 64,000, continues to go up, we are failing. When it starts to go down, we're succeeding.
Well, thank you, Governor, and I yield back.